Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Articulate Fly. On this episode, I'm joined by Olympic skier, angler, and podcaster Andy Mill. Andy generously shares life lessons and wisdom from his skiing, angling, and broadcasting journey. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. But before we get to the interview, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend, and please subscribe and leave us a rating and review in the podcatcher of your choice. It really helps us out. And we've received several listener questions asking about the best way to support the show. One way is to join our community on Patreon and make a single or a recurring donation. Our community has some great benefits like discounts on tying materials, guide trips, and more. Check out the link in the show notes for more details. And we recently released an interview-only show, The Long Haul with the Articulate Fly. So if you prefer to listen to the Articulate Fly without the fishing reports, just search The Long Haul in your favorite podcatcher. Now, on to the interview. Well, Andy, welcome to the Articulate Fly.
Well, my pleasure to be here, and thanks for the invite.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. And, one of the things we like to do, we have a tradition on the Articulate Fly. We like to ask all of our guests to share their earliest fishing memory.
Oh, I just remember a photograph. I don't really remember actually catching the fish. I was probably maybe 5 or 6 years old. The photograph of me with a fish I was gutting. I remember with my father in Laramie, Wyoming. He was giving me a piggyback ride. We were fishing. It was getting late, and you could see the caddisflies flying. I remember that. The actual fishing part, I don't really remember much about that aspect of it. I just remembered I just always loved, doing all the different things I did as a kid. Nothing really stood out. But in saltwater fly fishing, those kind of memories you'll never forget because we're talking, really big fish, really powerful fish. And when something like a tarpon, he opens his mouth to eat your fly, it knocks your teeth out of your head. I mean, it's like, oh my God, how could you ever forget that, But I've always loved fishing, and I grew up here in Aspen, Colorado. Once my family moved here in 1960, and I learned how to tie flies, I saw this fly line going across space. And the great Ernie Schwiebert was in town giving these clinics for the country store. I was on my bike going to baseball practice, and I veered over there. And all of a sudden, I had a fly rod in my hand. I think I was probably 8 or maybe 9 years old. And from that point forward, I was a fly fisherman. I loved the whole fly line part of the whole thing. And then once I tied my first fly and I caught a fish with my first fly that I tied, it was game over.
Yeah, it's a great thing too. It's funny. Trying to explain to kind of younger people today what it was like to learn to fly fish. And, there was no YouTube and you had to read books. And, I tell my boys I sent away, self-addressed stamped envelopes to get catalogs. And it was really just kind of a neat time to kind of be outdoors and do those things.
Yeah, for sure. You asked me the first time, my first memories. I don't remember the very first time because I was so young. But the first time I saw that trout eat my renegade that I had tied, that was probably a big light switch. And the saltwater switch was the first time I saw a tarpon eat my fly. So both freshwater and saltwater, it's all about the take. It's all about the bite. Then you're in the game.
Yeah, it's interesting too. And, you've been fortunate. You had a really long career in fishing even before you were kind of officially in fishing. And you've been able to fish and be mentored by a lot of people. So I won't ask you to list them all, but are there a couple that kind of stand out as being particularly impactful on your development as an angler?
Chuck Fothergill, he had a very famous, well-known name in this country. He first started learning or teaching how to put weight on your leader with nymphs. He taught me how to tie flies, and then the great Ernie Schwiebert taught me how to fly cast. In the saltwater world, it was Harry Spear. He and Steve Huff had won more saltwater fly rod tournaments than anyone in the Lower Keys. And so Harry was my mentor. I fished with him 40 days a year for 7 years before I ever fished a tournament. And I didn't realize it at the time, but he was grooming me to be a tournament angler. He knew, he was very adamant about how to do things, the difference between right and wrong. I had other great people in my life, like Lefty Cray, Flip Pallett, Steve Huff. I had all these icons in the periphery of my world, but they were not mentors per se. I think Lefty was a great mentor in the fact, not necessarily a mentor, but he was very inspirational in that he taught the world of saltwater fly fishing, how celebrities should act. He was just so genuine and real and calm but bigger than life. He did everything, wrote all the books, the casting, the humor, but he was always so humble and kind. That's what I take from him. Flip Pallett brought me to the saltwater world because I was a skier here in Aspen well after my athletic competitive years. But I couldn't wait for Saturday morning to see Flip in his show, Walker's Cay Chronicles. I wanted to be on his boat. Oh my God, he was everywhere. And then when I finally met him, it was so profound. It was like me meeting Jean-Claude Keeley, because this was Flip, my hero. And then many years later, I had written a book. It was kind of a funny, come to Jesus moment for me, and pinch me, oh my God moment. I was eventually well down the road. Many years later, I was doing a tarpon presentation at the International Game Fish Association in the big lobby. And there were about, I don't know, maybe 100 people in there. And in the audience was Stu App, Lefty Cray, Flip Pallett. And I'm looking out. Here I am trying to tell them my methodology. And then 2 hours later, we went across the street at Bass Pro Shops and we're all signing autographs. I'd written a book by then. And I looked down the line and I'm looking. Here's Chico Fernandez. Here's Lefty. Here's Flip. There's Lefty. It was just like, oh my God, this is my world now. All of a sudden, that was my world. And to ever think that I was going to go from an Olympic skier to having written a book and speaking about tarpon and winning tarpon tournaments, I mean, it's like somebody hit me with a magic wand and placed me, down the road in that realm.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's interesting too. We were talking before we started recording that, we met. I mean, it was kind of amazing. I tell people the story and I'm just like, it's crazy. They're like, how was Edison? I was like, well, I met Andy Mill. They're like, no way. And, I say, I was literally walking the show. I think it was on that Friday with David Blinken, and, he introduced me and you graciously agreed to be on the podcast. But I thought the interesting thing, we started talking about, being a competitive skier and how it translated. And you're like, well, I just never thought of myself as a great skier, right? I was a good skier, but I became a great tarpon angler. And I thought that was an incredibly fascinating thing to say, because I think of you as being a great skier and a great tarpon angler. And I was wondering if you could kind of explain that a little bit for our listeners, because I think it's so interesting.
Here's the deal. It's really hard to ski in the Olympics. They only take 4 Americans to ski in the downhill. So I was ranked the number 1 American downhiller for 9 years. I skied in 2 Olympics and 4 World Championships. Great skiers win the Olympics. If you don't win, how can you be great? In my book, for the average guy, of course I was great. I represented the country. But I didn't realize the difference between great and good until I became a tarpon fisherman. My last year skiing, I was finally on the cusp of winning. I got 5th in the pre-Olympics. I got 6th in the 76 Olympics. I was right on the edge. My last year as an athlete, I had finally got a great mentor. I got great skis. I finally, got to the point that I can win. And then I hit a fence in Switzerland and I broke my neck, my back, my leg, and my ski career was over. As I mentioned to you earlier, I basically ran out of body. I'd already had like 10 knee operations. Now I had a broken neck and a broken back. Once I got into tarpon fishing, and it's comparing apples to oranges because you can't compare skiing in the Olympics to winning the Gold Cup. They're completely two different things. It's so much easier to win the Gold Cup than it is to win the Olympics because you have all these countries, the best skiers in all these countries. It's a high-end professional sport. People are being paid a lot of money to win the Olympics. But in the fly fishing world, winning the Gold Cup was like winning the Olympics. So once I started to taste, victory and success with Harry Spear being my mentor, we fished my first tournament together. I got second in the spring bonefish fly tournament. We won the fall fly. I got third in the first tarpon tournament with Harry. It was the Gold Cup. Then I started understanding the difference between winning and doing well. And once I tasted that, there was no let up. It was like, since I never won as a skier, as a fisherman, it was like, I am not going to allow myself to lose. And I wasn't quite there yet because I won a bonefish tournament, but I hadn't won a tarpon tournament. But once I realized I was knocking on that door, I got fourth in the first tournament. I won the very first golden fly tournament I fished in. I won the first permit tournament I fished, the Del Brown. But once I tasted that, it was like there was no let up. And the difference the years, the span of years with my victories were 18 years. My first win to my last win. But I feel like I did not sleep for 15 years. I was so driven. In the winter, I was like tying flies and tying leisure and pulling on tippets and pulling on scales. I was a maniac. But I felt like that was the difference in really becoming as great as I became as a fisherman. I was relentless. But as a skier, I was too young. I didn't have a great mentor. I didn't have the understanding of what it takes to win. I was just trying to do well. But like the European skiers and some of the other Americans, once the American team got from out of behind the eight ball, then we had a chance to win. But it took a long time. It was right at the end of my career. But if you take a look at fishing in tournaments, it's almost like an oxymoron. It's a contrast in what we should be doing as fishermen. I just happened to become a tournament fisherman, and it was very, very important for me to win tournaments.
Yeah. And was that something that, kind of cracking the code and having your body run out and skiing that kind of haunted you, that gave you that drive?
I didn't learn how to win until I got hurt. That last year, I finally realized what it took to win. I reapplied myself. I rededicated, my life to skiing, and I realized I had just maybe a couple years left, and I went all in. But I never did that before. I was too immature. I was too young. I skied in my first Olympics when I was 23. I was not mature enough. I was distracted by, the lifestyle of Aspen, which was on fire, back in the 70s. Aspen was a generation of innocence. Sexual revolution was taking place. There was a total anarchy of this country post-Vietnam. And I wanted to take a big bite out of that apple, and I did. But in doing so, I sacrificed that as an athlete. But in my later years, I was married to Chrissy. I had kids. I had my TV show that I was producing and hosting, and now I had a chance to fish these tournaments. And it gave me a complete understanding of perspective from being a skier to now a fisherman. And I knew the difference. And I knew what it was going to take for me to win.
Yeah. And I imagine too, you also knew that like that opportunity wasn't going to last forever, right?
I didn't think about that.
Really?
I never thought I was going to be 71.
Fair enough.
You just think this road's going to last forever, but I couldn't have put more effort into what I did to win tournaments than I did. And looking back, I didn't have that as a skier, but you don't get second chances. And so I was very lucky to have a second chance as a fisherman. And I count my blessings for that.
And what was it that, I know you grew up fishing for trout, but, what was it that attracted you to the salt and tarpon in particular?
Well, I think it really stems, initially with Flip Powell and his TV show, catching these great fish on flies, sailfish and marlin and bonefish and tarpon, and just the adventure of running in a little 16-foot skiff out over the surface of the ocean and catching these giants, right? Trout are not giants. I skied at 80 miles an hour for a living. I wanted to catch big fish that would scare the shit out of me. That was what I wanted to do. Trout don't scare me,
That's funny. And so did it, and I know you went into bonefish and permit, but do you also like have an interest in like catching makos and sailfish and billfish on the fly, or is that not interest you?
You know what? I've caught marlin on a fly. I've caught, a number of sailfish on a fly. That kind of stuff doesn't really interest me a whole lot because you're waiting for the fish to hit your teaser. You tease them in and you do the bait and switch. That's cool. Marlin are huge. I get seasick. That's the biggest problem I have. But I caught GTs in the Seychelles. I am more of a hunter. And my son and I hunt elk in the fall with bow and arrows. We've been doing that for, I don't know, I've been doing it close to maybe 15 years, maybe a little bit more, 20 years. When we fish in the salt, we hunt. And now I find myself hunting for trout. So when I go trout fishing, I'm looking for a fish that's feeding on the surface. Or I may find a riffle and try to find a fish that's feeding in that riffle on nips. And I'll try to catch that one fish. I don't want to catch 15 or 20 or 30 fish. I want to catch that one fish. Now I'm riveted. I see that animal right there, and I want him. And that's where I get my fill as a trout fisherman.
Got it. And Andy, how would you define what being a great tarpon angler means?
Being a great tarpon angler is an angler who can catch the fish that doesn't want to be caught. Not everybody's going to graduate or gravitate to tournaments, and I just want to put that aside. That was my bag, and I don't want to say that you're not going to be a great tarpon fisherman unless you win the Gold Cup. That is total false. There's a lot of great fishermen out there that have never fished a tournament, but that was my baseline for greatness. But when you put that tournament baseline up to the side, a great guide is the guide who can find the fish that doesn't want to be found. And when you put that great guide with an angler that can catch the fish that doesn't want to be found, that's a home run. You were gonna empty the ocean when you put those two guys together. And so when I was fishing tournaments, I wanted to be with that guide who can find the fish that doesn't want to be found. And those guys wanted me. And that's why we ended up doing so well.
Yeah, that's neat. It's always interesting because, I always, I put a lot of pressure on myself when I fish with guides because I always want to fish as an extension of the guide, right? Because there's only, like, he can't catch the fish for you, right? He can help you put the boat in the right place, find the fish. But I always think that there's a kind of, it's almost like running a relay and then he passes the baton to you. And so that's always kind of my goal when I'm on the water is to kind of honor that commitment and all that time and energy and thought that the guide put into creating that situation.
Let me tell you, that's hopeful thinking. And I'll tell you why. The average saltwater fisherman does not fish that often to be able to do that for that guide. And casting dexterity. Right there. Really good fishermen, really good saltwater fishermen, they don't have casting dexterity. Casting dexterity is regardless of the position of the boat and the direction of the wind. Whether the fish is at, 9 o'clock, 1 o'clock over here, 3 o'clock, a backhand cast into a 20-mile-an-hour wind, forehand cast, over your head, so your head's between your rod and your fly line, where you cut that fly line in the middle of the boat between the guide and that angler. Making a forehand cast out there at 9 o'clock at 70 feet with the wind blowing 20 miles an hour right into your face. You can't make a forehand cast because you're going to pull the fly right into your face. You can't make a backhand cast, so you're going to hook your guide. So that forehand cast, that rod's got to be high. And when you come back with that backhand cast, that fly's coming over your left shoulder. Cutting the boat, cutting the string, casting between the boat. Not very many people can do that. And it takes years. A lot of guides don't even know how to teach this stuff. So when you fall short, on the bow of your boat, you got to remember, most people fish tarpon maybe only a week a year. It's so hard to do well with your casting without being on the water. You can't. It's hard to learn in a park. Most people, when the guide says you need to practice, need to go to the park and practice, right? They don't know how to fix mistakes. They don't even know what a mistake looks like. So how do you practice? It's like telling somebody to go to the golf range and practice. They've never had a lesson. So that's the issue with saltwater anglers, is that it's really hard. It's really hard, especially if let's just say you fish 2 weeks a year. They're doing the best they can with what they've got. And sometimes I feel sorry for them because they want to get better, but unless they fish really a lot for a long time, it's really hard to get really, really good.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the whole, I always say people never fish as much as they want to. So then the question is, given how much you can fish, how good can you really get?
Right. But you can study on the internet how to double haul, how to make a backhand cast. There's a lot of information on the internet. So most people, when they see a tailing loop, they don't even know what a tailing loop is. So how do you fix a tailing loop? So you got two problems. They can't identify it, and they don't know how to fix it. So all I can say, is that keep the enthusiasm up, ask your guides, and when guides get hard on their anglers, it's like, dude, don't you understand that these anglers are doing the best they can? They're doing everything they can to catch that fish. So you can't get mad at them. You can't.
Yeah. So Andy, can you share the specific moment that you realized that you had become a great tarpon angler?
I knew I was pretty good fairly quickly because I could cast well. I had really good eyes. I had a great mentor. I didn't think I was proven until I won. Until I always felt like everybody can get lucky and win once. But when I started dominating and winning, I won the Gold Cup 5 out of 6 years, But right now, my son is better than I will ever be. My son is incredible. But he's fished a few tournaments. He's gotten second and third in some of the tournaments, but it's not that important to him. But to see somebody see his eyes, oh my God, young eyes. Casting ability is crazy. Look, I was really great at one time, but I'm not great anymore. I'm a solid good.
And how long? So I read the story, like, you went on your first tarpon fishing trip, got the bug. How long was that journey from there to winning your first tournament?
Well, I fished with Harry Spear, who was my mentor, for 7 years. A lot. 40 days a year for 7 years. That's a lot. More than most people will ever be able to fish because they have jobs, they have families. I was very fortunate to be able to have that kind of free time. I won my first golden fly. I would say about 8 years before I won, but it was only the second year I was fishing tournaments. But that's kind of unfair because I felt like, for a long time, I had that tournament mindset. It takes a long time to get really good at anything. This is, say, matching the hatch, tying your own flies, reading trout water, being able to figure that stuff out. I'm not a great trout fisherman. I'm not. I can catch fish, but I'm not great. Oh my God, I'm just okay at it. My son is really good.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So, I mean, I was doing the math in my head. I mean, you spent over a year of fishing days on the water for tarpon, right? Before you won your first cup.
Yeah. I mean, by the time I was fishing tournaments, I was really good.
Yeah.
I was really good. I wasn't great yet, but I was pretty solid.
Yeah. And we've talked about this a couple times, kind of just in phone calls before the interview, really curious about how, you learned a lot of lessons skiing, but kind of how you took that preparation regime and applied it to becoming a great tarpon angler.
Here's the deal. When I was on the Olympic team, I was 23 years old. I did not understand the kind of discipline I needed. I figured out discipline after my ski career. I didn't figure out how to win as a skier until my very last year as a skier, just before I got hurt. I got fifth in the Olympics. No, I got fifth in the pre-Olympics, and I got sixth in the Olympics. But I still didn't have the understanding of how to be a really high-end professional as a skier. We were a bunch of amateurs. The team was pretty far behind the eight ball. We didn't have great equipment. I'll give you a prime example about equipment. One year we get to Val d'Isère, France. It's the first World Cup. And Erwin Stricker on the Italian team, he had this rubberized downhill suit. He had this fairing on the back of his helmet. He had bent ski poles. He had a fairing on his legs behind his knees. And I looked at my roommate, Carl Anderson. I said, dude, we are toast. I'll give you an example of what that means. A rubberized downhill suit. We had downhill suits that still breathe. The porosity of the fabric versus a rubberized suit, that's a 2-second difference just in aerodynamics in a 2-minute downhill. 2 seconds. When you're traveling, so we were averaging 66 miles per hour. So if you're going 60 miles an hour, that's 88 feet per second times 2. That's what we were giving up just with the difference of our downhill suit. So this whole sphere of professionalism and preparedness and expertise and knowledge was so far above our heads, we had no idea. I had no idea at 23 how to be a professional athlete against these Europeans that were getting paid a lot of money, great coaches, great training regimes, But as a fisherman, once I got to be a fisherman, I knew what it was going to take to win because I didn't learn all that until my very last year as a skier. I was on the U.S. ski team for 10 years, but my last year I finally understood about dedicating my life to winning, training every day in the summer, getting really fit, getting really strong, having the best skis that Rosenthal had available for me, having a great coach that taught me how to move to the inside with my hip angulation versus knee. And it's a technical thing where you can put your hip, your knee, and your ankle in the same plane. So at 80 miles an hour in a corner, you have much more stability than having the knee outside of that plane. Now I was stable. I can make one smooth arc and I had great skis. Now I could compete against the Europeans. Now I had a chance to win. And that's what I learned over that 10-year period as a ski team athlete. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what it took to win. I didn't have anybody helping me. I was not smart enough to get it. So when I made that transformation from skiing to fishing and winning tournaments as a fisherman, I knew the difference. I knew the difference, what it was going to take to win. And I was fishing against a lot of guys that were not previously, skiing in the Olympics and skiing at a professional level or any athletes. They were great fishermen. They were doing the best I could. But I think I had an edge because I understood the difference between doing well and winning.
And how did that sort of break down? I think we talked before we started rolling too, kind of thinking about like there's the physical aspect, there's the mental aspect. We were talking earlier about how you try to perfect everything in the chain so that there's no weak link.
Right, exactly right. So if let's just say there's a ginormous puzzle with 1,000 million little pieces to that puzzle. And if you're a sportsman at a high level trying to win against the best in the world, you have all these small little nuances, little pieces of the puzzle that have to be perfectly polished before you're ready to win. And those pieces might be a backhand cast, casting between the boat. How do you feed a fish? Bump, bump, bump. How do you talk to a fish? How do you know what that fish is going to do before he does it? That takes miles and miles and miles. And those are the things that I was really concentrating on. The smallest pieces of the puzzle could get you that win. Because if you have a piece that's not polished, that might expose itself in a certain situation. And the great fishermen, the great tournament fishermen, whether it be freshwater guys, Euro nymphing, competing against all the other teams around the world, they have the same issues. Everything is refined.
And how do you, so in some ways that's sort of the physical stuff. How do you kind of work on the mental component and prepare for the things that you can't control, right? Like, so you try to take everything you possibly can and get your arms around it. But how do you, become mentally tough and prepare for the unknown to have a chance to be elite?
To be mentally tough, you cannot lose your concentration for 1 minute. When it's a dark, cloudy day, you might only have one shot. But if you're not grinding, staring into the ocean, looking for that little difference of color, whatever it might be, you might miss your only shot. And you have to be able to make up great distances on a lousy day. You have to be able to catch fish when no one else is going to catch fish. Like I always was hoping for windy conditions, like an open blue sky so I can see, but windy conditions, because I knew that at least 50% of the field is going to go away when it's blowing 20 miles an hour. They can't make that cast. But, and I'll tell you, one of the mental things that really came up a year after I made a mistake. It was in a Gold Cup, and I had a fish come up, and it was the last day of the tournament. And I had a chance to win. We were in contention. This tarpon came up and sipped my fly like this, very, very, very slow bite. And it takes so much composure to wait for that fish to shut its mouth, to wait to feel the weight of the fish in your stripping hand here before you set the hook. And I slid that fly out of its mouth, and I missed it. It bothered me immensely that whole year, because when you lose, you don't have a chance to win again for another year. Because these tournaments, the Gold Cup, the Gold Fly, there's only one chance a year. We only have 3 tarpon tournaments a year. So when you lose, it's like it drives you crazy. You have to wait a whole another year. So the following year, this is kind of an interesting story because I'm not superstitious. It was the 5th day of the Gold Cup, a 5-day tournament. And we're on the starting grid getting ready to take off. I may have told this story before. But on the starting grid, what happens is you have 5 boats for every 2 minutes. You have a 25-boat team, 1 angler per boat, 1 guide per boat. So we're getting ready the gun's about ready to go off. And Kenny Collette, an Islamorada guide who was fishing with a Japanese guide, and they had won the Gold Cup twice. They were really good. And Kenny yells over to me, goes, "Hey, Andy, you got to move your truck." I go, "What are you talking about?" I knew he was messing with me. I said, "Why?" He said, your truck's in a bad parking spot. He said, "You're normally in the top 2 or 3 going into the last day. You're dead last." And I knew it had been a bad week. We had fish falling off, bad weather. I said, "Are you serious?" He said, "Yes." So I said, "Timmy, take me to the dock." And my guy, Timmy Hoover, he really didn't want to do this. He's like complaining. I said, "Take me to the dock. I got to move my truck." So I go and move my truck. We get in the boat. We're starting to run out of the marina there. I said, "Timmy, today is the best day we've had. It's a great weather day, big sun. You find me the fish, we're going to catch them, and we're going to win. So we were on the ocean, and I caught three tarpon on the ocean. They were weight fish, over 70 pounds. Then we went into this basin where the year before there was this fish laying there, and I slid the fly out of its mouth too soon. We go into this basin, we can't find a fish. We get up to where we had seen this fish the year before, laying in the same position, laid up. I slide my fly in there, same fly. Start sliding it. This fish moves up, same bite. And I'd been waiting a year to do this again, never knowing I was going to have this opportunity. This fish slid over, opened its mouth, had this real slow bite, exactly the same way as the year before. I waited. I started sliding my fly, and it gets tight. 115-pound fish, we caught him. I said, Timmy, we need to catch one more fish. We run around the back country, go into this other basin, we catch one more, run home, and we win the tournament. But these are the type of mental things that will drive you crazy when you make a mistake. Like if you're just fun fishing, you blow it off. But when it costs you a tournament, these are the things you think about that make you better. When you can't sleep because you've made a mistake, when you can't let it go, when you demand perfection. These are the type of things that bothered me. These are the type of things that I would never let go. This is why I feel like I didn't sleep for 15 years, because I was so possessed.
And it's interesting too, because we were talking before we started recording as well about, whether you're fishing against yourself or you're fishing against other people.
In a tournament, you're always fishing against the field because you want to win. But ultimately, you're always fishing against yourself. Because as a prime example, I was playing golf with my father-in-law yesterday, and he was saying, he's like an 11 handicap. And he's saying, well, I win all these tournaments with my buddies. I said, well, are you trying to fix your mistakes and get better with what you do? You want to be like a 3 or a scratch golf or a 3 handicap, 5 handicap. You're a 12, but you're okay with that because you're beating your buddies. If you really want to get good at something, you can't grade yourself on the curve because those guys all suck. You have to demand greatness, for yourself.
Yeah. It's interesting. And, when we spoke in Edison, or might have been on the phone call after Edison, and you had mentioned to me, you mentioned in the interview earlier that you weren't, happy necessarily being a ski broadcaster, and that this great door opened for you when the Outdoor Life Network called you, and you were able to kind of pivot out of the ski world and have this entirely new beginning, right, in fly fishing in a very different way that I think you found more fulfilling. I was wondering if you could share a little bit of that with our listeners.
When I got hurt in 1981 with that fall in Switzerland, it ended my ski career. I broke my neck, my back, my leg, and all the ligaments in my right knee. It's like, okay, what am I going to do now for the rest of my life? I don't have an education. I graduated from high school, never went to college. And I thought, how am I going to make a living? And I thought the only way I can make a living is through exposure. So I started this TV show called Ski with Andy Mill. It was a barter syndicated show. To make a long story short, I sold advertising. It was a 5-minute show. I distributed it all around the country. I was the director of skiing here in Aspen. But my 5-minute show, I was getting paid from all the products I was wearing. Boots, bindings, skis, sunglasses, clothing. I was making a lot of money with that little show. And now I'm doing the broadcast work for CBS in the Olympics. I covered Albertville in 92 and Lillehammer in 94. I was the director of skiing here in Aspen. I was on top of the world, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. But I was flatline. My life was not moving up. I was no longer an athlete trying to win stuff. I was never pushing myself personally. It was just, I was maintaining, I was making a lot of money, but it was flat. And I hated broadcasting because I was speaking about something I wanted to be doing. And now all of a sudden I'm in this life where I'm making money. I was a professional, but there was nothing exciting to it. And then I did a couple specials for the Outdoor Life Network, and I was a host on a couple shows, and they wanted me to host a fishing show. I said, I have no time, none. I am tapped. But I tell you what, you match what I make as a skier, all my contracts, all of them. You give me that amount of money. You give me a 5-year contract. And if I produce this TV show, all the money I save on the production costs, I get to keep as my bonus. So now, all of a sudden, I leave skiing fully. I am now producing fishing shows. And I was making about $750,000 fishing. And now I get to fish all over the world with the best guides in the world, telling these great stories. And I was making a lot of money. It was a massive home run for me, because now I was excited to wake up in the morning. I was going to go fish the Seychelles. I was fishing St. Thomas for 800-pound marlin. Guatemala, Costa Rica. I did a TV show in the Arctic Circle with former President Bush. And now, all of a sudden, I start doing this tarpon thing, and now I get to go fish tournaments. My life is climbing the mountain again. It's the greatest thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah. And why do you think people sometimes get stuck kind of flat, right? And, because it's an interesting thing, and it's, when I I try to kind of coach my boys growing up and talk about, finding those things that make you passionate, right? That'll give you that energy. Why do you think so many people just kind of look up in late middle age and they kind of have wasted 30 or 40 years of their life?
Look, I think a lot of people get married too young. They have kids too young. They have bills they got to pay. Man, they're stuck. They're stuck for a long time. There's no freedom. They're not financially free. The wife's got a job. You've got a job. The kids are driving them crazy. You get home, everybody's hungry. And sometimes you don't even have a job you like. You got to find work, right? And when I look around, I see that in a lot of places, And then two, how do you take that gamble? How do you take that gamble, like saying, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to go fishing. I want to work in a fishing store. And I'll give you an example. My father was like that. He was in the lumber business his entire life. He never had two nickels to rub together. But he got a great job here in Aspen running the lumber yard. Pushed forward a number of years. He was working in Denver as a lumberman. I don't think he really liked his job. He was not a very happy man because he was kind of stuck. And he came here when he was like 60-some years old, 66, I think it was. I taught him how to nymph fish. I taught him how to catch fish. He went back to Denver and quit his job like 4 months later. And he got a job at what the hell is the name of that? It's a little fishing store in Littleton, Colorado. Anglers All. My dad was tying flies for Anglers All, working the desk, and he was ecstatic because he could fish on the weekends, and he was tying flies. Anyway, I used to bust him a lot of times. I said, Dad, what kind of flies are you tying? He said, I'm tying San Juan worms and eggs. I said, Dad, those are not flies, dude. You're not a fly tyer. I used to always bust on him. But he was living large again because he was on the river and he was talking to fishermen, and it changed his life entirely. But he didn't have a lot of bills at the time. He was later in his years in life, close to retirement. So I think he's talking about people getting stuck. I was very fortunate. I was stuck at a high level because I was making a lot of money, and I was doing really cool things that no one ever dreams of being. A broadcaster for the Olympics, the director of skiing in Aspen. But me personally, I was flatlined.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I know when I coach my boys, I always talk, so I'm a Generation X guy. So, growing up in the 70s, I feel like we can kind of a little bit more rough and tumble maybe than millennials and younger kids. And I think some of that is a function of, growing up and having grandparents that came of age in the Depression and just a different sensibility. And it's kind of an interesting thing where, given kind of, my background in law and finance, I saw a lot of people that were really spending money just to keep from being completely miserable in what they were doing. And if you could kind of dial back, what you thought you had to have, you could maybe find a little bit of a crack of light in the door and maybe find a way to kind of squeak out.
Yeah. Well, look, I have been the most fortunate person, I could possibly ever imagine dreaming of being. I have an ex-wife that was a superstar in the tennis world. We have 3 great kids. I have chapters I look back at and I go, oh my God, how did I ever get here? How did I ever be so lucky to be able to have this life? I mean, some people are just luckier than others. Sometimes luck plays a huge role. And my son said, Dad, you get the biggest horseshoe up your ass. I said, yeah, I agree, but, I think a lot of luck comes from, being very fortunate, a lot of doors open for you, but being lucky is having the ability to not only step through that door, but being able to excel on the other side of that door. And it comes from, with me, I had this passionate heart. I was a really hard worker. I will work to the day I die. I don't know anything different. I want to work and I want to do well. I don't want to just make money. I want to excel at what I do. So I think I was gifted, with that desire to work hard, and it was not about the money. It was about chasing dreams. Mm-hmm. I think we live fully, all of us, while we were chasing our dreams.
And you've done so much, what do you have left on your to-do list that you want to accomplish and achieve?
I'm going to go to Mads Bay. I want to catch a striped marlin, free cast into a striped marlin without bait and switch. I want to go to, Bolivia and catch a golden dorado. Other than that, I just, I'm 71. I've had 24 operations. My body's killing me. I need another knee. I have my left knee's replaced. My right knee needs replaced. My neck is fused. My back is fused. Everything hurts. I could barely play golf anymore. I just really want to try to be able to stay active, and do things. I still want to elk hunt in the hike country. And I got back to Aspen. I've been in Florida all winter. I went on not even a hard hike yesterday. I've got so much lactic acid in my body. It's like, are you furious? My God. I used to be an athlete. What happened, And now I know I've got to look forward to September when I got to chase my son at 12,000 feet, 11,000 feet chasing elk, So my dreams are to see my son's about ready to have a baby this week. The dreams I have now is to see really great happiness, with my entire family, my kids, my young grandson that's going to be born here this week, and really being able to, I've been very fortunate to be able to be connected to the fishing industry. And I don't take that lightly. I think that it's a big responsibility to do with what Nikki and I do with our podcast, bring to light a lot of stories that are going to go away, with age and time. I want to help maintain the history of our sport, the evolution of our sport, and the people that created our sport, and what they did to innovate what they've done, and give respect to the people that came before me. I will never take for granted what I have in my life. It did not come easily. But with that said, I have a lot of work in trying to help preserve these other stories that came before me, these icons, these legends, and their stories are going to die if they don't get on your podcast, on our podcast, and let them tell their stories. So the younger generation will realize what took place to get this game to where we are today and who did it. so that it gives them a baseline, not a baseline that just so what they know now. I think it's important to know how we got here. Conservation too. If we don't know how we got here, it's really hard to understand the direction we're going to go into the future. And so what I have left in my life is really trying to, be kind and humble and let people, I want to be treated the way I want people to treat me, the way I want to treat them. And I always want that, and never think that I'm nothing more than a mountain guy that did okay.
And it's, as a father, it's got to be just absolutely fantastic to have the podcast and get to work with your son.
Yeah. Look, we were speaking about that earlier. I have 3 sons. I love them all dearly, equally. But Nicky has gravitated to the things that I've always loved. He's always wanted to be on my shoulders and seeing what I saw. I'd be, signing up in a tournament. He would be on my shoulders. We'd be on the boat getting mullet, playing with the mullet. Started bow hunting. He's a great bow hunter, kills all kinds of great animals. And now we work together. It's a dream to be able to have a son like Nicky who connects with the things that I love. And I think, too, for him to have a father that understands the things that he loves. Goes both ways.
Yeah, it's very, very neat. Andy, is there anything else this evening you want to share with our listeners before I let you go?
I would just say, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you find the time and place to listen to silence. Hear how loud silence is. And when you hear, and when you're in the presence of silence, you can hear your inner voice of what you want to do, who you are, where you want to go with your life. What does love mean? What does your family mean to you? How can I make my family better? How can I be a better dad, a better father, a better fisherman, better employee, better owner of a company? Because we're not grading ourselves by what other people are doing. We're grading ourselves by who we are and what kind of a person we are. And remember, always try to dream big and chase those dreams.
And Andy, if folks want to follow your adventures on the water and in the field, running after Nicky, going up the mountain chasing elk, where should they look?
Yeah, so our podcast, Millhouse Podcast, you can watch it on YouTube, and our Instagram site, Millhouse Podcast Instagram. You can watch and see some tips and some words of wisdom. But you can also listen to our podcast on wherever you find your podcast, Spotify. I don't know anything about that stuff. I'm just a voice. My son does all that. I'm just a figurehead with the talking lips here,
Yeah.
But we're out there, and we have now, I think we've done 111 podcasts. And if you scroll through it, you can find offshore captains, great guys have done a lot of great things in the world of fishing.
Yeah, as I always say, you have people, which is good, to take care of all that stuff. I'll drop links to all that stuff, Andy, in the show notes. And I super appreciate you spending the time with me. Incredibly generous of you. And I look forward to seeing you on the show circuit again soon.
Well, I'm honored you have asked me to be here. And again, thank you so much.
Take care.
You too.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Again, if you like the podcast, please tell a friend, and please subscribe and leave us a rating review in the podcatcher of your choice. And don't forget to check out our community on Patreon. Tight lines, everybody.